このチャンネルはリアリズム。Are you feeling what I'm feeling? If that feeling is nostalgia for an era that you've never even experienced, you know exactly what we're talking about today. City pop. Where do I even begin? City pop isn't just a genre of music anymore. It's an entire vibe, a mood that really encapsulates a feeling, cultural mindset, sound, and state of being specific to a geographic time and place in history. And that is 1980s Japan. City pop has also been able to transcend its origins due to its recent rise in popularity with, interestingly enough, mostly non-Japanese fans. And you're probably one of them. City pop is a type of Japanese music that got really popular in the 1980s, and it featured a very cosmopolitan urban image that resonated with those who benefited a lot from the post-economic boom in Japan that happened after World War II. Let me tell you, the 1980s in Japan was a wild time. During this economic bubble, Japan was pouring money everywhere, from consumer goods, researching technology, new inventions, new media, anime. This time period was known as the golden age of anime, and of course, city pop. But what exactly makes a song city pop? City pop's music style is very clearly drawn from funk, R&B, disco, jazz, and also island sounds from Hawaii and Okinawa. All of these have been combined to create a very distinct style. Some of the more obvious signs of a city pop song are if it uses a lot of synthesizers, drum kicks, and very disco funk type beats. Basically, the most 1980s sounds you can think of. Beyond the technical aspects, I like to think of city pop as a feeling, and once you feel it, you know exactly what it is. To better understand city pop, let's trace our steps back to one of the kings of the genre, Yamashita Tatsuro. Okay, imagine this. You are a young Japanese person, it's the 1980s, and you're living that big city life in Tokyo. You just got off of work, and it's the weekend, and you get into your Japanese-made car, you pop in your Yamashita Tatsuro cassette tape into your Japanese-made stereo, and as you listen to his music, you cruise off down a beachside road into the sunset. This feeling of leisure and ocean getaways guides us to some of the roots of the city pop sound that Yamashita Tatsuro helped develop. Yamashita's early career began in the 1970s when he was part of a band called Sugar Babe. Sugar Babe experimented with more upbeat, tropical, and folk sounds rather than the heavier rock that was popular at the time. Unfortunately, maybe because they were a bit ahead of their time, they weren't really successful, and eventually they had to break up. Other members of Sugar Babe, like the vocalist Onuki Taiko, would later go on to be very popular and influential city pop artists as the genre matured. Yamashita went on to continue experimenting with his jazzy, tropical pop compositions that were the foundation of Sugar Babe. Of course, he wasn't the only one at the time who was playing around with these types of sounds. Other important artists who helped pioneer the early sounds of city pop include, but are not limited to, Hosono Haruomi, Suzuki Shigeru, and Sakamoto Ryuichi. Hosono Haruomi in particular was heavily influenced by the sound of exotica lounge musicians, who painted this picture of a faraway, exotic paradise with their music. Hosono saw his music as embodying that exotic world rather than projecting it, and I think that really sums up the essence of city pop. Instead of dreaming of a paradise, the music became that paradise. During the 1970s, the hard work that these artists put into developing the sound that would later become known as city pop went relatively unnoticed, and album sales started off pretty low. But as with many cases of perseverance, they kept putting out their music, kept releasing albums, and maturing their sound, and then it happened. In 1979, Yamashita Tatsuro released Right on Time. And it was, well, right on time.
Right on time.
The song peaked at number 3 on the Oricon music charts. After this, the sound of city pop, as we know it, took off, especially once big record labels started getting involved like Sony and RCA. The term city pop was coined because of the feelings of living that big city life in a modern, more urban world that the music evoked. The same year that Right on Time came out, Sony also invented the Walkman, which would change the way we listen to music forever. Now you could bring the sound of city pop with you wherever you wanted. As the genre continued to gain massive popularity with the Japanese populace, another major landmark for city pop happened in 1984 with a song that you probably all recognize. Takeuchi Mariya released her hit song Plastic Love in 1984 alongside her album Variety, and she made huge waves, hitting the #1 spot in the Oricon music charts and solidifying her own status as the queen of city pop. And just as a little fun fact, Takeuchi Mariya and Yamashita Tatsuro got married to each other in 1982. And then in 1984, they both signed onto the same record label, Moon Records. Can you imagine having that sort of star power both under one record label? Of course, there were so many other incredible artists that I haven't mentioned who also came out of the city pop era. Some very honorable mentions include Matsubara Miki, Hamada Kingo, Sugiyama Kiyotaka, Yagami Junko, Anri, Ohashi Junko, and just so many more. I gotta stop there because if you let me go full fangirl mode, this video will be 2 hours long. The rise of city pop was also very culturally significant. With sounds borrowed internationally and especially from the West, city pop represented a type of music that wasn't just Japanese, but rather a more fluid, cosmopolitan configuration of what it meant to be Japanese. One that a lot of young people could increasingly relate to as their world became more modern and globalized. While the songs still spoke to a very Japanese experience, they also took on a lot of English lyrics wherever they felt like it, and more individualist personal themes. Around this time, you start hearing more songs about going on flings, one-night stands, dating, and especially from women who were beginning to have more freedom in the way they lived their lives. The themes and the sound of city pop represented a time in history where Japan was becoming a more global entity. The culture of city pop music also found itself seeping into other media, especially anime. The 1980s were an amazing time for anime, known as the golden age of animation in Japan. Bubble era Japan was a time when I think money was just being thrown at anyone who could make anything, but that's a topic for probably another video. What we can talk about today is how much great music came out of 80s anime. City pop music was incorporated a lot into anime soundtracks and their openings and endings, which I think really created a unique mood to 80s anime. Some of the shows or OVAs that embraced the city pop sound include California Crisis, Maison Ikkoku, Kimura Orange Range, City Hunter, so many more. Sadly though, just like any bubble, it has to pop. And once the 1980s passed, city pop became a dusty relic of the past. The type of music that your parents would listen to and people didn't really think was cool. City pop became known to the next generation as shitty pop. Little did they know, a few generations later would reclaim this genre as their own new cool thing. And that brings us to today. 40 years after 80s bubble era Japan, we're experiencing a city pop revival. Even in K-pop, we're seeing some idols coming out and modeling themselves after a very distinct city pop inspired sound. And city pop has spawned subgenres such as vaporwave and future funk. Our generation is known to be a nostalgic one, as we turn to the past for inspiration in making new art. I'm sure there are a bunch of other young people in the world who feel the same like me, and they wish they could have experienced that wild time that was the 1980s bubble era Japan. But in the meantime, I'm glad that we have music like city pop to turn to evoke feelings of nostalgia and help us escape into feelings of a better time that we can only dream of right now. Thank you guys for joining me on this little journey through the history of city pop. This by far wasn't a fully definitive guide to the genre, but I think it lays a really good foundation and you are definitely encouraged to research more into it. If you have any of your own cool city pop facts to share, please let me know. Thanks again, and until next time, keep listening to city pop.